About 2 hours left, then we get to go have some more fun. So who wants the mic?
I've got it.
You've got it. Ramon's got it. All right.
All right. You mentioned the Monroe Institute earlier, and one thing I enjoy doing is listening to the old Explorer tapes that they have on the website. And in one of yours from the olden days, you were discussing with an entity about the energy, using the metaphors of the day that you were using, the energy body, and how the physical was sort of like a shadow onto the physical matter plane of that more refined essence. And Robert Monroe asked about male and female, and you conveyed the information that it was sort of that male-female was more than just what we experience on the PMR in this reality, but that it was sort of a more fundamental attribute of consciousness, as far as there being just a balance, and that as entities evolved, that those two energies sort of balanced more and more. There's more of a balance between those opposing energies as one advanced. And I just wondered if you could speak on that sort of concept.
Sure. There are things that we can learn more effectively, in at least in this physical reality, as male, and some that we can more effectively learn as female. Males and females have two different sets of experiences. We live in two different realities. We see things differently. We process things differently. And having experience from both sides is very useful. So most people incarnate as both male and female from time to time, but often a preference occurs somewhere in there, and they may get more mileage, they may get more value out of one or the other. Usually if that goes on for a long time, though, then they get maybe a little out of balance. They may go the other way for a while, so then they may prefer the opposite. But in any case, most of the entities that you meet, not here in this physical reality, but elsewhere, they come in male mostly. And by male, what do I mean by male? What I mean is that the characteristics, the way they interact with you, the way their personalities are, kind of remind you of what we define as maleness here. So see, it's a projection. So if I interact with an entity and I say, well, that was a male entity, that's because I've projected male onto the data that I got from that entity because it fit my experience of maleness here. So that's the kind of entity I get. So when I get that kind of a interface, then I may, dress it if I'm going to dress it. Usually I don't even dress entities. We're just consciousness to consciousness. But if I were to dress it, then I'd dress it like a male, right, or a female. So, and give it the voice of the male or the female. But that's me overlaying my interpretation of the data I get. So it doesn't mean that it's a male or female as much as it means my interpretation, the kind of the way it presents itself. Become that way. Now, that's my own bias of my experience that I've had here, how I see things as male or female. So that's one thing. Secondly, you also get beings more often than not that are neither. They're just an intelligence. They're just an entity that you communicate with, and their sex is not pertinent. It's just not there. And that's probably the larger case, where they're not identified. You don't have a sense of them being male or female in their characteristics. They just are. And if you ask them about it, it would be a very strange question to them, because in the non-physical, obviously, you don't have the physical kind of differentiations that we do sexually. That's a physical reality thing. So these beings who are not in physical reality don't really relate to that question, because it doesn't mean anything to them. Also, if you ask them, what's your name? What are you called? Usually you'll get a name. Oh yeah, it's you people down there in that virtual reality. You get this thing about names. You need to name everything. But typically they don't have a name, and if you press them for a name, well, I need something that I can call you by, they'll tell you anything. Call me Fred. They'll say whatever, or make up a name, and that'll be fine. But they don't use that kind of a label. That's a thing we do because we're down here and everything's separate. It's our rule set, You know, we're all separate and we're all individuals and we all have names. And everything else has a name. If it doesn't have a name, we can't think about it or talk about it because we can't order it in our mind. We can't compare it to something else. You know, we have to, I mean, what are we comparing? That thing over there compared to that other thing over there? You know, what's their other thing? You know, it doesn't compute. But if I say I want to compare the pencil to the pen, you know exactly what we're talking about, and that makes sense. So we have to name things so we can operate with them. They're little chunks of data that we can operate with, and that's because everything is separate here. But from the non-physical, world doesn't work that way. They just have information that defines things, and they don't work with pencils and pens either, you see, so they don't have the same stuff. It's not a stuff-based world, it's a data-based world, so it's different. So male and female is mostly your interpretation of the way that being comes across to you. Some come across in a very masculine way, some come across in a very feminine way, and that's individual. What's masculine to me, you know, what I see as a masculine way doesn't really mean anything other than that's my experience and that's my pigeonhole that I put it in because of me. That may not hit you as a masculine way, you see, or somebody else. So we may not even, you know, attribute the same sex to the same entity. So the sex really isn't a significant part, but it is sometimes a significant identifier if you're trying to explain who was this entity, how did they react to you. And in our language, it's hard to talk about people as it's. Our language kind of nudges us to use he's and she's. So when we're making an explanation to someone, we tend to interpret that into a he or she, which whatever's the closest fit. And sometimes we can say it, but mostly we pick a pronoun, you know, that is more appropriate for somebody we're talking to, and it usually is not the right pronoun for somebody that we're having a chat with. So that's another thing. Our language kind of nudges us into those sorts of interpretations as well.
Thank you.
How do you keep like power and capability balanced with wisdom?
Well, he says, how do you keep power and capability balanced with wisdom? And in other words, if you have power and capability, there's a temptation to use it unwisely. So how do you have power and capability and maintain the balance of using it well? That's a system that comes together in a way that maintains the balance. And here's why. If you are out of balance with that, if power that you have, and by power I mean an ability to change things, right? If you have that power and you don't use it very wisely, that power is, one, either it will never get but so much, it's limited, or two, you'll lose it. Okay, the system won't support you using a non-physical kind of thing to create a lot of damage, mostly. No, it's not always the case, but it's because of the way we are. What happens is that when we use things for wrong purpose, for poor intent, because we are not evil people, that strikes a chord of dissonance in us. Even though we're doing it and maybe we're greedy and we say, yeah, that's what I want, there's a part of us that knows that's wrong. And that dissonance tends to create entropy. That dissonance gets in the way. So as long as you're on this positive side of evolution, doing things the wrong way tends to fix itself in a sense that the dissonance becomes a problem for you. And you don't have as much power because this ego is the reason you're doing it the wrong way, and this ego prevents you from being the open person that is required, low noise, to actually have the power in the first place. So they're kind of incompatible, for one. So the system kind of writes itself there. Somebody who has developed themselves enough to be reasonably powerful in their ability to change things has also developed themselves enough to have some wisdom in how to do it. And those who have developed themselves just a little bit may or may not have much wisdom to go with it. Okay, so that's typical. Now, the opposite of that is on the negative side. On the negative side, instead of of instead of love, you have basically chaos. You have high entropy kind of behavior. And there you can use control and force to force yourself into clear states, low noise states, and that's how on the negative side you can evolve to more and more power. And there, your wisdom that goes with it is how to use that power to create the most entropy as possible. We wouldn't call that wisdom, but you see that from their viewpoint, that would be wisdom. So there are negative entities that do grow up in a negative way, and they actually lower their entropy by being focused on the negative, because they use control to get rid of the noise. So they can learn to meditate and do things as well. So you do have a negative side that can get powerful, and you have a positive side that can get powerful. In general, I have found, just out of experience, that the power of that negative side is limited. And that's because the negative side deals in fear, it deals in no trust, and those things tend to disintegrate cohesion, kind of disintegrates building. Things you can't build well without trust and working with fear. It just is it's kind of a destructive mode to be in, whereas the positive side has no limit. It can go up to as high as it can attain, whereas the negative side gets back here and starts to stall out. It's really hard to build up using basically force of intent and force of mind, force of will to get you up that far. It's hard to get much past that. So typically, those that are very powerful negative entities are not all that powerful if you look at even medium powerful positive entities. Now that's just my experience. I have to, that's somewhat limited, but that's been the way I've seen it. You have something else to say to that? I expect I didn't answer your question too well. Go ahead.
That's what keeps the system pretty stable, I'm guessing?
Yeah, the system is stable because it's very difficult to get too, to get too negative and to have too much power on the negative side, and you don't really get but so strong that way. It's a minor side. The negative side plays in the margins for the most part. They're playing their games amongst people who are very fearful. And those people who are very fearful create a source from which they can work with that fear. Negativity and fear kind of a connection. They go together. And you have a people who are not very fearful, and it may be people who just don't believe that anything like that happens. There are no negative things. There is none of that stuff. And therefore, they're less vulnerable just because they don't have a fear of it. So that kind of limits where fear can go. Fear works mostly in the margins among negative people. Now, it can interact with you only as much as you have some fear and ego for it to get hold of, because that's its way. So if you don't have fear, if you're fearless and you don't have this ego, basically the negative side has very little traction with you. They can do very little to move you or influence you in any way. But as much as you are fearful, then you can be manipulated by that fear. So the antidote to negative entities is to be fearless and to be positive, because that makes you pretty much impossible to get in the energy. They send your energy your way, but if you don't have any fear or ego for it to resonate with, it just kind of goes on by. It's only when you have somebody who's afraid that they can really resonate with you, with that fear. Does that help, or do we need to go on another tack?
I was thinking more so like how to prevent yourself from abusing power, like a tyrant kind of.
Prevent yourself from abusing it. That comes with practice. When you start, typically, you're just doing everything you can because you're trying to collect data on does it work or not. Okay, so you have healing. Anybody has anything wrong with them, you try to heal them because you just want to know. And then you ask them, did it work? Do you feel better? And you just tend to be very open about it and not take a lot of pains to think too much about what the consequences are. And if it starts to work and you get feedback that says, oh, I'm really having an effect here, that's a little sobering. Now you know you can affect people physically with your intent. And that tends to make you be a little more careful about what you're doing. And now you have a little more power because you've practiced and you've gotten a little better at it. And it tends to work that way. So the more power you get, the more wisdom that comes with it, or you wouldn't get the power. It's hard to keep a low noise focus when your ego and your fear is chattering away. So once you get rid of that fear and ego that doesn't chatter anymore, then you get the more of the power. So those two go together. It's hard to get a lot of power and abuse it unless you're on the negative side. If you're on the evil side, you can, but then you're limited into how far you can go. So the abuse thing, it's funny, but the people who have the greatest ability to affect things in this world use it the least. When you have a lot of ability, you get to that point where you don't use it anymore because you realize that messing in with the natural flow of things is generally not helpful. It's a trick of ego to make you think that you can be helpful someplace, and then when you do, you realize it's really not helping anybody. It's not helping them in the big picture. It may help them in that little instance, but it's not really doing much, and then you just kind of let it go. And the people who are doing the most changing are generally the people who are still at the beginnings of it and they're still working real hard to try to figure it out. So those with power hardly ever use it. There's no point, because the reason we're here, you see, is to grow. Get rid of the ego and the fear. Well, why do I want to manipulate things to be the way I want them? There's only one reason for that: ego. I think I know better. I know how things should be, so I'm going to make them be that way. I don't want anything bad to happen to me that I don't like. It doesn't feel good, so I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to me. All that is ego. It's all about me. And with that ego, I'm probably not very powerful. So that's kind of how it works. So there's usually not a lot of abuse, and most of the abuse is in the margins. It doesn't really affect the big picture very much. There's always people who act up in the margins, in any society, but it's a minor thing most of the time. There are some places where that's not true. If you go to either coast of Africa, you will find that that's not the case. There is a lot of misuse of this sort of power. There are people there who will, basically it's a confidence game. Do what I want, or I will make you sick rather than heal you, that kind of thing. Or I will do something else. And because the population has seen that and felt that, it's a reality, they fear that, which makes it easier for them to do that. So those kinds of things are more present elsewhere than here, and that's partly why we have this thing called the psi uncertainty principle, which tends to keep that from happening here. And that's probably why the psi uncertainty principle became a company policy, because those things did happen in older civilizations, in older places. So the system tries to prevent it, but it doesn't stop it because it's free will, and that's the way the game can be played that way.
What would be the power source of our virtual reality?
What would be the what? The
power source.
The power source for our virtual reality. Well, you have to think, one, how much power does it take to run an information system? So in an information system, energy is a number. So it requires the energy, to make that number. In an information system, you don't need, we have a lot of power. So somebody, takes a bottle of gasoline out here and puts a fuse in it and lights it, and we have an explosion, it breaks windows and, does all kinds of things for 100 feet all around. So that's a lot of power. That's a lot of energy. Where'd all that energy come from? Well, of course, the science answer is it's, chemical energy stored in the gasoline. But in a simulation, it's just number, because they calculate that chemical energy stored in the gasoline, and then they calculate what damage would be done and which windows would be broken, and they pull out of the probability distribution, and that's what happens in the world. That's whose windows get broken and whose don't, and so on. So the energy that happens here is just numbers. It's just calculations. It doesn't take a lot of energy. It doesn't take any excess energy for something to blow up in a virtual reality. All you have to do is, run the numbers and have the result of blowing up, and there it is. Doesn't take any extra energy to run it. So big storms, big things that have, millions of units of energy in them, then millions of watts of energy, say in lightning, that kind of stuff. It's not like it takes some extra energy source to make that happen. That energy is only here. It's non-physical. It's non-physical lightning. You see, it's a non-physical explosion, and it only seems physical here. So I'm not sure if that was your question, but yeah, okay.
I have a question. Some people say they can talk to plants, and I'm wondering how your theory explains this.
Well, anybody can talk to plants. It's just whether or not the plants answer. That's the hard part. Yeah. You can interact with a plant, and anyone who's done any research in the area will tell you that if you love your plants, they will grow better and flourish than if you don't. If you dislike your plants and think they're a nuisance and so on, and you don't really care much about them and ignore them, they won't grow very well. They'll be very, they won't be very happy plants. So yes, your influence, will work with plants. So there's two things going on there. One thing is whether you have a positive attitude towards your plant and you love your plant means you are modifying the future probability that that plant will do well and grow because you're putting positive energy toward that plant. So then you're the one creating the response of the plant to grow and flourish because you love your plant. So that's one of the mechanisms going on. Besides that, the plant itself has an awareness, but that I don't go as far as to say that it has consciousness. Now, that's just me and the way I'm defining things. That isn't fundamental. You can define consciousness a little differently and include the plants if you wish, but my definition, and I picked my definition because it's a definition that most people understand intuitively. And if you give plants consciousness, and it raises all kinds of other problems, and people don't really understand the subtleties of the problems and whatever, so I find it's just a better communication to make my definition such that if you have a zero decision space, you're not conscious. In other words, you have to be able to make decisions with free will. I can go this way or that way. Now, plants, of course, do things that look like they are smart. They follow the sun, but that's not necessarily because they make a decision to follow the sun. That's because the side of the stalk that gets the sun, contracts, and the side of the stalk that gets the shade relaxes, and it just moves the thing to, it's just a hardwired reaction. And it's the same with some other life forms, in my book, I talk about the clams, right? But, we don't really know whether clams are conscious or not unless you work with clams enough that you can teach them to do something. If you can teach them to go through a maze or teach them to select certain things, press the red button instead of the green button when the bell goes off, this sort of thing, then that's a decision they'd have to make. That's not just hardwired to them which button to push when the bell goes off if you can train them to do something. Well, I don't know if anybody has ever taken a bunch of clams and tried to train them to do anything in particular. So I don't know whether clams are conscious. But a lot of things are hardwired, where if you do this, stimulus response. And there's a certain, with plants, living things, there's a certain awareness involved in the plant that it has. It's not making decisions, so it's not conscious. It's not saying I'll do this or I'll do that, but it's just aware kind of what's going on. It's aware of its environment to some limited thing, and it's not processing that environment. It's not making judgments. It's not making choices. It's just awareness without choice to act on that awareness. But you can still have awareness without the choice. The choice is another thing. So that's the category that I put plants in. And if it's aware, it probably has awareness that this is a nice, supportive environment, and awareness that this environment is nasty. I don't want to be here. So besides the fact that you, the human that loves the plant or hates the plant, change the probability distribution about how the plant goes, there's also the plant that probably has this awareness of whether it's hated or loved, and reacts appropriately. Okay? It probably shrinks from the scorn and, you know, blossoms to the, you know, to the caring. So both of those are going on, and they're both kind of separate functions. So the people who have green thumbs, which means everything they do with plants, the plants flourish, it's because they care for the plants. They have a real caring to that plant. They probably talk to the plants. You know, that's their lovely little darlings, you know, in the soil outside, and they're happy to go there and tend those plants, and they have all this positive energy toward the plants, and the plants respond by just growing and doing really well and making prize tomatoes, you know, at the fair and other sorts of things, because the people like the plants, and those that don't care won't water their plants, you know, they're just not nice to them because they just don't care that much. Well, the plants probably get that, and they react to that, and they're not too excited about being there either, you know. So yes, there is a communication you can have with a plant. And there's a book written about the secret life of plants by Clive Baxter. There he did a lot of experiments with plants and their reactions to things, and most of those I would explain by just plants having an awareness. So they do have some sort of a reaction, but they're not making a lot of choices about it. Now, if research proves that not the case, that they do make choices about it, you can teach the plant to push the red button or the green button, or, you know, wave its leaf this way or that way based on the stimulus that you give it, which shows that it's actually making a choice what to do. I would change my mind, and I would say plants are conscious just like anything else, because they would exhibit a choice making. And a choice doesn't have to be a complicated choice. It could just be a very simple rudimentary choice rather than a kind of a hardwired reaction. And if that's the case, then I would say plants were conscious. So it's not really a theoretical aspect of MBT to say that plants are not conscious. It's mainly an aspect of the way I define consciousness, and whether or not plants have been shown to respond in a way that is choice-driven rather than a way that's hardwire-driven. And I'd say the same thing with clams. You know, I don't know. Now, I know some insects are conscious because I've watched them stalk their prey. I've watched them make decisions and do things based on what something else did. Something else goes this way, it goes that way, you know, and you can see that it is making choices, and it's not entirely hardwired. I mean, some of that behavior might be hardwired too, but you can tell when odd things happen and you get a very intelligent response to that odd thing, and you see that over and over again. That bug is taking in data, processing the data, making a choice, and that so bugs tend to have consciousness. Now, I don't know about all bugs, you know, some bugs. You know, I watched a bumblebee stalk my father once. He was out swatting a bumblebee, and the bumblebee went after him, and he ran inside and shut the screen door, and he stood inside, and that bumblebee went up just above the door where he couldn't see it, and hovered and waited, and I'm sitting on this porch, you know, watching all this and very intrigued by it. And that bumblebee stayed up there for, I'd say, at least 5 minutes. I mean, a long time. So this took focus. You know, a bumblebee who, you know, could only focus for a few seconds and then goes off and does something else. This bee was focused. He stayed up there for a long time. And then when my dad thought it was safe, he opened the door and he went out and wham, got him right on the back of the neck. So that to me was premeditated. You know, that would pass in a court of law, I think, as premeditated. And anything that's premeditated is a conscious choice. So I think bumblebees, now I don't know, I've never researched bumblebees and tried to train them to push buttons or go through mazes or do anything either. But from that, I would guess that they make choices. You know, so if a bumblebee can do it, why not, you know, a praying mantis or an ant or something else? There's hardwiring. There's hardwiring with us. We have instincts too that drive us. We react out of hardwiring to a lot of things. But we also have free will and make choices too. So the hardwiring and free will aren't like an either or. It's a mixed bag of those for everything.
Just another question that you brought up there. Would you say that most of our choices are from, you know, our hardwiring, just genetic? Some
of our choices are. I wouldn't say most. It kind of depends on what you're doing. But some of our choices are hardwired. And you know, and most of them, I think, probably are not. Depends on what you're doing and what your choices are revolving around. But we have instincts. You know, we're an animal. just like all the other animals. It's the Homo sapiens. That's an animal, and it has instincts like other animals do. You've evolved, and there's certain patterns that evolve that help you survive and help you procreate. And in those areas of survival and procreation is where most of our instincts lie, because that's the hardwiring. All the rest of it, we tend to make more choices, but we get some hardwired patterns that have shown over the last 2 million years that it's more survivable and you can more successfully procreate if you're this way, and we're just hardwired that way. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't overcome it. You can overcome your hardwiring. It's not that you're forced to do it. You're not a slave to it, but that's your tendency. That's your inclination. That's where you move toward, because that's just innate. And an animal, a bear or a dog can overcome their hardwiring too. But we have some of that. We have instincts, and that's our proclivity. That's the way we go. And it takes a little effort to not go that way, to overcome those instincts.
Does that mean that plants and bumblebees have a place in the non-physical reality? In other words, are they consciousness that belongs not only to this reality, but also they are consciousness outside the
Yes.
this reality?
Yes, absolutely. Anything that's conscious exists in the non-physical. That's where all consciousness is. There is nothing conscious in the virtual reality, just like there's nothing conscious in the World of Warcraft set. All the consciousness is outside of this reality. In fact, consciousness can't be in the same reality as the avatar. See, the avatar can't create consciousness. So the avatar of the elf in World of Warcraft, the consciousness for that has to be outside of the World of Warcraft theme park or the World of Warcraft set. The World of Warcraft has its own little world, and consciousness can't be in that world. It has to be outside that world. And here we have this virtual world, and consciousness exists in a non-physical. Consciousness is, the virtual reality is the simulation of what's physical. Consciousness is not just information. Consciousness processes, does things with information. It doesn't just exhibit. So consciousness is outside virtual reality. And if you have a conscious bumblebee, then that bumblebee has a non-physical part that is that consciousness making those choices. So it's not that choice of the bumblebee is not made in a physical sense. It's made in a sense. So does the bumblebee have a soul, that sort of thing? Yes, but it might be a group soul. It may be that bumblebee isn't likely to learn a whole lot of lessons on its own. It may be as part of a group that have certain characteristics. So that'd be like you having 10 elves and you kind of play them all together. They all fight as a team. They all fight or they all run. They all do the way you want them to do, and they'd have your one conscious, but you'd be working a bunch of players. So it could be that kind of a thing with bumblebees. So that's, and when I just say could be, the system, again, can configure itself whatever way is most profitable for itself. If it's more profitable for it to, let bumblebees evolve individually, then that's what it does. If it's more profitable for them to evolve as a group, then that's what it does, and it's a matter of resources. If it's individual, now you have resources dedicated to every bumblebee. If it's group, then you have resources dedicated to a group of bumblebees. You see, so one's more cost-effective than the other. So the system will do whatever is most cost-effective as far as resources versus return gained and entropy reduction. So it could be, here you have one particularly smart bumblebee that knew how to whack this guy that was out trying to, to swat it, and maybe that bumblebee would get an individual, consciousness for that because it was maybe one of those that is out in the front, evolving, making choices better than others, so maybe that would have an individual, and maybe others wouldn't. So it doesn't have to be all this way or all that way. However the system finds it to be effective, however the system finds it to be efficient, that's probably the way it works, and that's probably very fluid. It can change time to time. Same with us. There's those of us walking around here on this planet that have no clue, have no interest in having a clue, and there's no reason to spend a lot of resources sending them stuff in their intuition because they never pay any attention to it, right? So there's not as much going on there. they could just as easily be worked with a group as well too, just like the bumblebees. And here's somebody else who's just really aware and really plugged in and learning and growing, and they may have several entities in the non-physical working with that entity, helping them, giving them little things to egg them on to help expand their consciousness. It may be a group effort. So now you might have somebody has a couple of non-physical things helping them out other than just maybe their IUOC. So it just depends. The system is going to place resources where they do the most good. No sense throwing resources at something that isn't working. So it works for people the same as it works for bumblebees.
So to what extent can we say that a living entity is consciousness? I'm thinking about probably bacteria, amoeba, or even cells.
Yeah, it's to the extent that they have a non-zero decision space. Okay, if they can make decisions, if presented a situation, they have the free will to choose, to make a choice, then I call that consciousness. May be very dim. Now and the only way to tell whether that's consciousness or hardwiring is to do some research to find out, can they respond individually to things. So if a human cell can make choices of how it gets information and how it passes it on, and it can choose to do this or not do this, and it's not hardwired because you can get it to react to unusual circumstances and see how it reacts, and it always, well, I shouldn't say it always, it sometimes reacts that way and sometimes different based on circumstances. It gets hard to determine what's hardwired and what's not. It gets very tricky because you have little things you can't ask them, hey, hello down there, it doesn't work. So it's very hard for us to find out on this lower level whether they're conscious or not. I suspect a lot of things are probably just maybe aware but not conscious, but who knows, until we actually do the research and see if we get an independent response rather than just a hardwiring, we'll always do the same thing. Stimulus response, it's hardwired, you do this, it'll do that. Sort of when your doctor puts your knee up there and he hits it with the hammer and the leg flies out, it's not a decision. That's just a hardwired response. And if that's all you get, then it always works the same way. But if you can get it to do things, like you teach it to do a maze or something, and that's probably not a hardwired response. That takes choice to figure things out. Then you change the maze and see how long it takes to learn it. And now it does that second maze in a quarter of the time it did the first maze. Well, it's learned something. That could be hardwired, but now it's looking less likely. So we don't know. There's a whole lot of things I don't know. So I don't say, a lot of people do say cells are all individually conscious. Amoebas are all individually conscious. I don't know whether they are or not because the research hadn't been done to actually show whether they make decisions, and that's my definition of conscious is, does it have a finite decision space and actually make choices? Other than that, I'd be willing to say it's maybe aware of things, but if it can't make decisions, then it can't express that awareness. It's just awareness that's unexpressed.
I've heard you say several times that you really can't teach anybody anything, but you can create an environment that facilitates learning. Well, I've tried to teach people things on several occasions, and the best it got was that I had no success, and the worst it got is it made the situation a lot worse. So I'm very open to hearing you go into some detail about how I might create that kind of environment so that I can do better the next time.
Okay, the most important facet of that environment is security. You have to give people the security where they can react without, authentically, talking about being authentic. They have to have the security that they can be authentic. Because if they can't be authentic, then what you're getting in your reaction is just ego. You're getting junk. It's not even them. You're just getting their habits. They react habitually to this because that's in their culture or something else, and you're not going to make much progress. So one, you have to give them enough security that they will be honest with you. They will act out of their own being level. And then the second thing you can do about that environment after they're secure is that you can be very patient, and not feed them information, certainly not force feed them information, but just let the subject be there. See? So you want to talk to them about anger and the results that anger has. Rather than coming up with a discussion, I'd like to talk to you about anger today. You just kind of bring it up generally and let the person comment about it. If they don't have any interest in that, then try to bring up a subject they do have interest in. In other words, you have to lead from behind, not lead from in front. Leading in front is, come on, follow me, I'll show you how to do it. Leading from behind is encouraging somebody to do it themselves. So you try to get them involved in the conversation. Talk to them about whatever interests them, and then work anger, which is the subject you want to get to, into that conversation. So they want to talk about baseball. Well, talk about baseball. Talk about the pitcher that got so mad he threw the glove at the umpire, got thrown out of the game, and look where that, that was interesting, but sure didn't get him very far. I wonder why he did that. See, and get the conversation going, and then let it go where it goes, with you just adding some things that kind of open up the possibilities. Oh, well, I never thought about, where did that get him? Didn't get him very far. And then maybe something else will come up, and you have to lead from behind, not from the front. You can't directly say, here's what we need to talk about, and here's why, and you need to know this, and I'm going to try to help you. That won't work. That'll just make it worse. So you bring up subjects and let them fall, and that person may resist you, and they may not want to talk about that, and they may change the subject, and you just have to let that go. Okay, that's done. Next time, try again, a little different way. And if that doesn't work, next time, try again with a little different approach. And if you've done this a whole bunch of times and nothing works, let it go. They're not ready. Just let it go. And try it again later, when maybe they'll be ready. Or just when things happen to them. I was driving the other day, and I didn't see this guy in my mirror, so I pulled out in front of him, and boy, he beeped the horn and gave me the finger, and drew out his pistol, and maybe you can then say something about anger management. That's what you really want to talk to him about. And wait till things happen in his life that bring up this problem. So if he has a problem with anger, things are going to come up that's going to be a result of that anger, and you can just say something general, not like, see, look what you got for that. That's too direct. You can say, yeah, that happens to me too. It seems like anytime I get angry, I end up sticking my foot in it, and it's really a mess. I don't know about you, but that's what happens to me. Well, what that does is get him thinking, is that what happens to him? You see? And now he's doing it on his own. So that's how you have to approach the problem. You have to let them come to it in their own way, in their own time, from their own experience, and you just are an encourager that facilitates the process. Not openly and not directly, but just facilitates the process. And then that way there's no conflict. Because as soon as you try to teach, directly, unless the student's really ready and wants to be taught, you're going to get resistance. It's going to go the other way. And then even if you mention the subject, they're already, the hackles are up and they're resisting before you even talk about it. So that's the way to approach it. You have to be subtle, non-evasive, not pushy, and let them come to all the conclusions themselves. You can't say, aha, see that? Therefore, that's the lesson, unless you really have a good relationship with them and they don't mind you pointing that out. But if they do mind you pointing that out, then don't, because it won't help. Even though you think, look, there it is, so logical, so clear, it's sitting right there that even, an imbecile would notice it. And if I point this out to them, they'll go, oh, right, I see it now, thanks. Doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen that way. To you, it is so perfectly logically clear that they did this and then that happens, and then the next day they do the same thing. They do that, and they shoot themselves in the foot again. And then they shoot themselves in the foot again. And you're saying, you shouldn't pull that gun out and pull the trigger like that unless you aim it somewhere else. And it won't do any good. You have to get them to the point where they go, oh, is that my foot? And then you started someplace and you go, yeah, I think it was. Make them feel better. Say, yeah, I do that all the time. Hurts, doesn't it? You know? It's that sort of thing. You need to let them be secure. Because if you say, yeah, that was pretty stupid, I never do that. You see, now they're not so secure. Now they're like, You have to make them feel secure and that you're not judging them. Because once people get judged, they resist. So that's the way to approach people like that. Don't judge, don't push, let them get to it on their own. You can't tell people much of anything, except in very special situations. Now, there's sometimes people want you to tell them things. You know, a new guy comes to work, right? And he's learning to do what you've been doing for 20 years. He wants you to tell him things. He'll hang around you and he'll ask you, well, what about that? What are you doing there? And how's it work? And he's asking, tell me. Now, there you can be direct. You can tell him exactly what he needs to know. And if he does it wrong, you can say, no, that's wrong. And he'll say, thank you. Great. How do I do it right? And now you have somebody eager to learn. See, they're ready. They want to learn. And that situation happens sometimes, you know, outside the workplace too, where people really do want to learn. They feel like, well, I don't know. What's your opinion? And you can tell them gently what your opinion is, but be careful you don't say anything that could be judged as negative or that you know and they don't or something like that, because then they're going to push back. And now you've made it worse if you go there. So when people are ready, and if they ask you, well, you know, tell me what you think about my anger. You know, you think I have a problem? Say, yeah, you might. Might be a problem there, you know. No, let's, you know, what else? Did you do anything else that was angry today? You know, that kind of thing. Let's explore it, see if that's a problem. You don't tell them that, but that's what you do. You kind of explore that admission and see if there was more, and what you're doing is getting him to think about it by your questions. Kind of the Socratic method, right? You ask questions, get them to think about things because you ask the questions. You could say, well, I don't know if you got an anger management problem. That's just one thing. You know, people do that one thing kind of all the time. Is this something you do a lot? Well, when you ask that question, he thinks, is this something I do a lot? And if he's got a lot of ego, he'll say, nah, I've never done that before. But let that go. Next day, something else will happen, and you keep working on it. Eventually, you'll get through, and you'll make a difference. And the more they learn and the more they grow, the more they like you, and the more that they really think you're being very good for them, very helpful. So then you'll get the positive feedback, and here's somebody trying to shove something down my throat, you know, and that's the very negative feedback.
Well, it strikes me that in the approach you're advocating, implicit in it is a real sensitivity to where the other person is at and how they look at the world and how they're feeling, and particularly their sense of safety and all.
Yes.
And trying to put that front and center and not really pushing the data aspect
Exactly.
of it until the other person is emotionally secure enough that they can
They're ready for it.
engage
Yeah.
with that material.
That's exactly right. To communicate with somebody, you have to start from where they are. You can't start from where you are and demand that they follow you. You got to go to where they are. If they're afraid, if they have anxiety, if it's a new subject, you have to understand where they are. Where is their head? Where is their world? What does their reality look like? You have to understand that, and then from their perspective, you need to start there. In other words, join them in their perspective there. So that person about anger, you can join them at the part that, yeah, that was really annoying. Boy, I see why that made you angry. Now you're with them, right? Now you've joined them where they are. Now after that, you can lead them to think about something else, maybe. Some consequences, or does that happen often? Whatever, you can do something with that. But first, to communicate with somebody, you got to start from where they are, and then you have to lead them very slowly to where you're trying to, you know, get them to see, things you're trying to get them to understand. But if you start from where you are, that's when you tell them, you know, you're acting like a jerk, you know, getting angry all the time. Anybody says anything to you, you blow off, you know, what's the matter with you? That's from where you are. That's the way you see it. And if you share that with them, it doesn't work, doesn't connect. They can't get that because that's not their image. In their mind, it's those other people. Well, they made me angry. Anybody with a brain would have been angry at that because of that behavior. They don't see it their problem. They see it somebody else's problem. So when you tell them that it's their problem, they don't compute. It doesn't mean anything to them. They can't process that information because that's not the way it is. You just don't understand. You see? So you got to start from where they are to where they think you do understand. They feel that you understand and you're not going to judge them. Then they're more open. Then they'll tell you how they feel. And as they tell you how they feel, for the first time, they'll probably actually be telling themselves how they really feel because they're just working on, cultural stuff and whatever. It's just the way it's always been. They're not really thinking about it. They're not thinking about their motivations or where they're coming from. But as they get them to talk, that becomes more obvious to them. And now you're hitting pay dirt. You're going someplace. So certainly, you can't communicate with somebody. It's not a communication until the other person understands. It's kind of an old saw phrase that, and they won't understand if you don't start with where they are and speak their language. They won't understand. So the first key thing is to be able to see their reality from their eyes. Well, that takes, what do we call it? Empathy. That takes ability to connect. That takes ability not to push your ego over into everything else. You not to think that everybody else is just like you and sees the world the way you do, because that's the obviously right way to see it. You realize that everybody gets their own reality, gets their own data stream, they interpret it their own way, and their reality may be very different than yours, and you need to be able to be sensitive to what their reality's like. What do they see in the world? What's their perspective? And with practice, you can get that. You see, when you live in your own world and your own reality is the only reality there is, you assume other people share your reality, but they don't. You get in their reality, see it through their eyes and their feelings. It's a different place, and that's where you have to communicate from, that different place. And that sensitivity to other people will come with practice, and what you're doing is you're picking up their feelings, their information, their data stream, how they process it, and you're actually seeing the world through their eyes. You're smelling the smells, you're tasting the taste that they taste, and you have that level of empathy that you plug into them and see where they're coming from. And that's not too hard to do, but it does take practice to do that. You have to be sensitive to them, and of course you get more sensitive to them if you really care about them. If it is about love and it is about caring about other people, it's not that hard to get tuned into other people. If it's really about you and you'd really like to know what they're thinking, you see, so that you could use that or be aware of it or manipulate them or something, now it's a hard thing to do because you're really not connected to them honestly. It's really about you, and they're a mystery. But if it's about them, they become less of a mystery because you really do care about them, seeing the world from their viewpoint. And then the data flows back and forth, and you understand what they're experiencing in their reality, and now you can know what to say and when to say it, rather than just taking a wild guess. So the first change has to be that you really have to care about them, because you're not going to understand how they're thinking and feeling if you don't care about them. You're stuck in your own head that way. You don't get into their head until you share with them. And you don't share with them if it's you and them are separate. You share with them by being part of them, because we're all connected. And you're not judging them. You're not having your intellect say what they're doing right or wrong or how they need to be fixed. You're just sharing with them. So that's the approach that you have to take, and you interpret it exactly right. The first ticket is to understand people, care for them enough that you get it from where they're coming from. Then you can be some help. Now, sometimes you get it where people are coming from, and you share and you connect with that person, and what you decide the best thing is to do is to walk the other way, to not get involved, to not connect, because there's no point. They're not ready. You have this idea that maybe you could be of help or be of service to them, but they really don't want your help and they don't want your service because they're not open to it. And at that point, you just let them be. Maybe some other time they'll be open. They'll want to grow up, but now's not the time. So it's not like you take everybody under your wing and fix them. It doesn't work that way. Some people want your help, need your help, they just don't know how to ask for it, and if you try to give it to them, they'll push you away. Other people just don't want it, don't need it, and won't like it under any circumstance, and you'll leave them alone. can't help everyone. You can only help the people that are ready to learn. Sometimes they don't know how to get ready to learn or what that means. They don't even know that they want to learn, but they do. And those people that really do want to learn and they do want to grow up, they just know how to go about it. They're just stumbling around in the world. Those are the people you can be of help to. The ones that are, completely out of contact and want to be that way and take pride in it, you're not going to do anything for them.
The last thing I'd like to say is that when you talk about being where they're at, I don't think you mean just on a kind of cerebral level. My sense of the process is that you have to join into their reality and almost become them, at least for a few seconds, and really understand and hear what it's like to be that person, what they're thinking, what their stream of experience is, and then from there, I think you can be appropriate.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I meant. No, it's not a cerebral thing. It's not that you go in and intellectually sample their thoughts or something. You have to be them. You have to combine with them. The old Vulcan mind meld, thing. That's what you need to do. And that's a level of empathy that you can cultivate and learn how to do.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Hi, Tom. I think I've heard you say in previous videos that the evolution of the quality of consciousness isn't always a linear process. There's ebb and flow, stagnation, even regression to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. When you have beings relative to this PMR that are a little more evolved and they find themselves in that stagnation, is there a common impetus that you find more advanced beings relative to this PMR? Is there a common impetus that allows them to move on? And further from that, beings outside who've progressed from this PMR, do you find that they often or always operate from the being level as opposed to what we might construe as an intellectual level, or is there always an intellectual aspect regardless of your development?
That's a real good question, and it's one that's a very confusing question, because I talk about the intellectual level, and I often am talking about it in a negative way. It's just your intellect. You got to get down at the being level, and pretty soon people are saying, "Well, this is my intellect. I depend on this. This is what I live with. This is what tells me to go right or left, or where I left my glasses. I don't." What do you mean? It's a problem. And you're right, the intellect is a wonderful tool. It's not a problem. We don't say the intellect is not a negative thing. But here's the difference. It's the intent. Okay? Intellect in the service of ego is not helpful. Intellect in the service of fear is not helpful. Intellect in the service of love and caring and compassion is helpful. It's good. So it's not that you throw away the intellect. It's what you throw away is the fear, and you throw away, the anger and the dislike and the whatever. And what you need is to apply that intellect with love and with caring about people. That's kind of the key thing. So it's not just the intellect's bad, or whatever. It's that most of us, most of the time, apply our intellect to deal with our fear and with our ego. That's what we do. Most of us, most of the time, are driven by ego and fear. And that's why, most of the time, the intellect is a problem, because the intellect, most of the time, is connected to the fear. So I don't want to give the intellect a bad rap, and that it can never be part of the solution, that we always have to get away from it. We only have to get away from it when it's fear-based and ego-based and belief-based. Because that's the common thing that happens most of the time to most everybody, that the intellect is in the service of the fear and the belief and the ego. That's why in our talk about these things, it almost seems like I'm always anti-intellect. The intellect's part of the problem. It's not. The intellect's a wonderful thing, and it can help you in your pursuit of becoming love, which is what we're here to do. So the problem isn't with the intellect, the problem is with the fear. Well, go ahead and give me the rest of your question. You had some other aspects.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a common impetus for a more advanced being who finds him or herself in stagnation.
Yeah, we have, psychology has this thing called the subconscious. And the subconscious and the being level kind of look like maybe they're cousins. They're different things, but they sort of look similar to some people. Well, from my viewpoint, and the viewpoint of MBT, the subconscious is a pathological expression. Okay, if you have no fear and you have no belief and ego, in other words, if you become love and you care about people, then care about everything, care about life, care about existence, and have empathy, then you don't really have a subconscious, because the subconscious is where you're dealing with fear and expressing your ego. That's in there. It made me do it, right? Now all of a sudden something happens and I get angry and I don't know why. It was my subconscious. Well, it's that kind of thing. The subconscious is a driver, but if you let go of that fear, you just have a being level and an intellectual level. There's no fear. And they work together wonderfully. It's a great team because one of them's intuitive and the other one is logic-based. And if you combine that in a team, you've really got a winner. They work good together. And that's really where we're trying to get. And at that point, you have no subconscious. You're aware of all the things you do, even of your instincts. You're being driven by your instincts. That's clear. You don't do things and say, where'd that come from? Because there's no sub parts of your consciousness. All your consciousness is clear and open to you. It's the fear that creates that. So are there people that, as you grow up, that subconsciousness, contracts, and you get rid of all the fear, it goes away. You don't have a subconscious. You become aware of the whole thing. And you're always aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So that makes you a little different, I guess, than the people who are walking around who have fear and have beliefs and have a subconscious, and they're driven by things. They're driven by feelings and by emotions and other things. You still have feelings and emotions. You just own them all. None of them are hidden and none of them surprise you. They're all just yours and you understand them and accept them.
So at a much more advanced level than our PMR, the intellect wouldn't subside relative to our PMR.
No.
It would just be...
Yeah, the intellect grows too. The intellect gets more and more powerful as well as the being level. The intellect sees bigger pictures. When you see bigger pictures, there's more data to process. You have more choices. You have all this stuff, and the intellect is what does that. And you have we usually call that left brain, right? And then you have the right brain, which is the intuitive stuff. But it's also intellectual level, being level. And at the being level, that's just who you are, not who you think you are, and that's the difference. If you don't have fear and ego, who you think you are is who you are, and who you are is who you think you are. You don't have this schism with this subconscious that kind of makes up this secret part of you that you don't really have, that you're not in touch with. So as you grow and evolve, your intellect becomes more powerful. Your intellect's dealing with more data at a higher data rate. You're seeing bigger pictures. You have a lot more decisions and choices to make because you understand more about what's going on. You see, you have empathy for that person. You not only know what you think and what your reality is, you know what he thinks and what his reality is, because you can join with him as part of that reality. A lot more data to deal with, so the intellect has to grow too. So it's not the idea that this evil intellect has to go away as you grow up. The intellect grows as well as the being level, and the whole thing grows together, and really what you want to be is not right-brained or left-brained. You want to be whole-brained. You want those two to work together, and they're a great team, which is why it works that way. You have a whole intellect that can really grasp the picture and see all the parts and how they fit together, and you have an intuitive part at the being level that just represents you at the gut, not thinking about it, but just being it the way you are. And those two have to be seamlessly integrated with no conflicts, no hidden subconscious, between them. They're just all one thing. You just become one aware consciousness at that point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I sometimes give the intellect a bad rap. But that's because most of the time it is. But it doesn't have to be. We make it that way.
Would you agree that you can make your intent into ego? Because I get confused with that. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm so intent in doing things that I don't know if I'm really being an egomaniac myself. So to me it's hard.
Well, that's true. You can get obsessed with things, and your intent can kind of get in a self-reinforcing cycle, right? And intent can be egotistical. You can have egotistical intents. That's fine. And your intents can get saturated to where you get obsessed. And then if your obsession gets even more focused, it's called hysteria, right? And you can progress down these things of, tight focus and cyclical action feeding itself. It's in double E terms, that's positive feedback. That means, the faster you go, the harder you get pushed, so you keep going faster and faster and faster. And that can happen. But that sort of thing is to be avoided. If you have a bigger picture of things, then you generally don't get so wound up around a specific thing. If you always have in mind how you and whatever you're doing connects to the rest of the world, and what's your place in that world, and how is what you're doing contributing to that world and fit into it, and why is it necessary, and why am I doing it, and what's my intent here? If you're aware of all of that, then you tend to not get wrapped up in the details. It's when that picture closes down and all in your world is just this thing, and I have to meet this deadline, and I have to do this, and I have to get that done, and now the rest of the world isn't really a part of that. You no longer are in the moment with that thing. You're obsessed with it. You're captured by it, and your decision space gets small. So that's the problem. So the solution is to always stay in touch with everything and how you connect to it, and that's what's usually meant by living in the moment. Being here now, as Alan Watts, I think, said, the title of his book. It's being here now, just being connected. But it's not being connected in a little way. It's being connected in the big picture. That's what you connect to. It's like we talked about mowing the grass. If it's just you and the lawnmower, that's a little picture. If it's you and the lawnmower and what difference that makes to the rest of the world, well, you can say, it doesn't make any difference. But it does. You're mowing it for a reason. Why are you mowing it? You hate grass? Why are you doing that? You're doing it for some reason because you think it looks nice, because there's an ordinance in the city that says you have to mow the stuff. There's some motivation for you to do that. And you need to be in touch with that motivation. Why am I doing it? And be at ease with it. Have accepted it. If it's because you're part of making your neighborhood look nice, well, that's good. You're being a good neighbor. You're cooperating with the other people. It's a good thing. If it's because the city says you do it, well, then it's just one of those things in life that you have to do because it's a rule, and you'll get in trouble if you don't. And that's just the way it is, and there's no animosity or no grinding the teeth or no being upset with that. It's just some things we do because we have to do them. Here I am, getting it done, you see? So it's an attitude. So again, what I'm talking about is being light, being positive, seeing the big picture. Don't get tunneled into the little picture, and then your life will be a whole lot better because you'll know what you're doing and why you're doing it all the time. And typically that'll keep you on a more even keel and not let you get so wrapped up in a detail.
The thing is that sometimes you have to be focused to get results.
Yes.
So that's
You can be focused. There's a time to be focused and a time to feel the big picture. And eventually, as you practice being part of the big picture, you can do both. You can be aware of that big picture and how you fit in, and you can be very focused. So you might think of that as kind of a parallel processing, but that's the state to be in, to where you're always connected with the whole, but sometimes you can focus to get the job done. See, I know, I'm a physicist, and you do technical things. They require very precise things. You're going to solve a problem. It's a very precise problem you have to solve. And even if you're a businessman, it's the same thing. You get very precise problems that you have to solve. That requires a lot of concentration and focus. But if you let that go, if you let the rest of the world go, when you do that, you're just crippling yourself. You need to keep connected to the rest of the world while you still do that. So that's really where you're going. It shouldn't be an either or. And if you're not to the point that you can do both, then do the one when you need to do the one, and then quit and do the other. Don't always stay focused. Some people will get in that knot, and then they stay there for the rest of the week because that hadn't been solved yet. Then you just need to sample. You're in that when you're in it, and when you're done, walk out of that office, you're done. Let it go. Come back, connect to it again. But eventually, if you do that, you'll get to where you don't have to make that hard 1-0 demarcation between the two. You can do both at the same time, and that's really the preferable way to do it. So you never get disconnected. The be here now is always, but you do have to focus to get your job done. Yeah, the intellect, the left brain's an important part of what we do. We'd all stumble around kind of stupidly if we didn't engage that logical processing. So it's important to do it, but once it takes over to the exclusion of everything else, then it becomes part of the problem.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to comment that we're going to start applying the lower entropy and increase your quality of consciousness in my business, because it works. In a business model, it works because
Sure.
you need to lower your entropy in the business, increase the quality of consciousness of your staff.
Yes, absolutely. It works individually. It works, in groups. It just works because that low entropy means the more efficient. It's the more efficient process. And business sometimes feels like if they don't lie, cheat, and steal, they won't get ahead of the competition who is lying, cheating, and stealing. It's not like that. If you do it right, you find that you'll do it well. You'll be very efficient at it. And it's a good business strategy.
This may be very little picture thinking, but when somebody is choosing an avatar for their next go-around, is there a lot of competition for the good ones?
I think that's really not a problem. I've never noticed that being a problem when I've worked in those kinds of areas. I think there are plenty to go around.
Well, what if you want to be a really good basketball player, for example, and you want to play in the NBA next time around?
Yeah.
Are there a lot of
Well,
people lining up for that?
No, I think that's not the case, because what you're working on when you're doing the planning for the next time, what you're working on is your growth, your personal growth, your spiritual growth, your learning. And there isn't much that you can learn as a basketball player that you couldn't learn as a poker player, or that you couldn't learn, as a veterinarian or anything else. In other words, the learning opportunities don't really go with the career. It goes with experiences and what you make of them. And you can get all the experiences that you need to make the progress that you need in almost any kind of profession or in any kind of culture. These things are available. It's hardly ever the fact that the learning opportunity is in this profession or this culture or this something else. You get these learning opportunities all over the place. They're just different. It's a different approach to the same thing. So I've not noticed that there's any, the good ones, they're everywhere. They're all good ones. It's like you go to the theater that's built really, really well, and they say there are no bad seats. Still, some seats are better than others, perhaps, sometimes, but basically there are no bad seats. From every place in a well-built theater, you have a good view and you can hear everything perfectly.
Well, I'm just thinking, for example, let's say you were in the NBA, and let's say you did play on a team where teamwork was way more important than the individual ego, and where you'd have to really work hard to do a great job with anger management. So that you, in some ways, if you look at basketball, you can see that it operates as a microcosm, and a good team is a perfect example of what a perfectly run society would look like.
Right, and that's true, but there's good teaming in thousands of places. You have good teams in business and good teams in everything where people have to work together. There's very few jobs where you just go off and sit by yourself and work. some people have jobs like that, but mostly they're not. Mostly, if teaming is an important aspect of almost anything you do. What about the family with 8 kids that all have to take care of each other and somehow put food on the table? Talk about teamwork. They all work together. Or the farm, where the kids grow up and they help the dad on the farm and so on, and everybody has their jobs to do. That's a team. Anybody doesn't do their job, there's a hole that occurs. Basketball team, any kind of sports team, but any kind of business team, sales team, there's just teams in everything. So I don't think there's a big line, behind the basketball counter, We're going to, New Incarnation Central, and they have all these counters, and here's the basketball counter. I don't think there's a big line that lines up behind the basketball counter because of the teaming involved. There's teaming involved in everything. A family's a team. When a family doesn't work together and they don't support each other, it just doesn't work very well. It doesn't give you what you need from the family. So teaming is important. That just means working with other people. It means being cooperative, thinking of others besides just yourself is what a team is all about. And it is a very growing situation. That's why significant others are very good. You have a significant other and suddenly you have a team. And you can't just think about yourself or you're going to ruin that relationship. You have to think about that significant other and be part of that team, be an effective member of that team and do your role well, or you'll create trouble. So teaming's everywhere. So I don't think there's a particular line, the long line between the really good jobs. You might think that, well, being rich and beautiful, would be a really good job. Everybody would want to be rich and beautiful, but that's not so. They have the same problems that we do. Rich and beautiful doesn't help you grow up a bit. So it's not a long line for that, because this is not like a theme park where you go to have a wow ride. This is a job. You're going to grow up. And rich and beautiful doesn't help in the growing up. Matter of fact, it's a challenge in the growing up. You have a whole lot more choices as rich and beautiful, and you have a whole lot more opportunity to make poor ones. So it's a challenge to do some of these things that seem like everybody would want to do it, but everybody doesn't really want to do it when their concept is growth, personal growth, rather than their concept is easy living. Once we get here, our concept's easy living. But when we're there looking for a way to grow up, you see, it's different. Now our concept's on growing up. What about the poor people, poor families? You see pictures of them all the time, and the little babies have the pot bellies, and have a mama with a baby here and a baby here, and a couple stringing along behind, and they all look like they haven't eaten for a week. They're a team. They stick together. They're really close. They take care of each other. That's a close team. They have to be, or they wouldn't survive. And they share what they find. So you can get very positive opportunities in all sorts of environments, besides ones that are comfy, or ones that are, famous or high profile. We don't realize it, but just our everyday life, even if it's hard, is rich with opportunities. You just have to have the courage to reach out and take them. And you have to approach them with love and caring rather than with, what can I get out of this? What's in it for me? That's the deal. If you do that, if you can approach it like that, then everything's a teacher. Everybody's your guru.
Given that we're still in daycare, would you please talk about the gifts and the challenges of the World Wide Web for empathy and for intellect?
Yes, the World Wide Web has been a wonderful invention, but of course it does have its downside. Like any tool, it can be misused as well as used. But as I talked about in Spokane, we people who want to grow, okay, everybody's here in this room. You come here because you're interested in growth. You're interested in becoming more. You're interested in becoming love, getting rid of the ego and the fear. That's why you're here. If you weren't interested in that, you wouldn't be here. So there's people like us, and there've always been people like us, and they've been all over the planet. There's people like us, but they're all isolated. They don't talk to their neighbors because their neighbors don't feel that way. You know, you don't have a lot of discussions with your neighbor over the fence, you know, about my big toe, right? Because it just doesn't play well, because your neighbor just really isn't interested and they would think you were crazy. So you keep it to yourself mostly. And that's the way it's always been. So there's been these little pockets of individual excellence, low quality consciousness, you know, little cells of enlightenment, and they've been around for thousands of years. And sometimes they'll pop off a school or a religion or something else, you know, but they've always been here, but they've never been together. It's always been little individual people and organizations for thousands of years, and we've never gotten together, and we can now get together on the internet. See, gentleman here from Mexico travels around the world. How did he know about this? Well, because of the internet, right? There's something on the internet that plugged him in. How did most of you find out about this? Probably was the internet. So why are we all here? Because there's an internet. If there wasn't an internet, you see, I would have probably sold 100 books by now, and nobody would have heard of me, and none of you would have heard of each other or me either. It's the internet that pulled all this together, made it possible. When I published my books, I just put them on the internet. Couldn't advertise, didn't do anything, just put them on the internet. And I figured if they're good, people will like them and they'll pass the word. If they're not, they won't. The idea is to be helpful, but you have to let that go in its own way. And probably everybody's here is here because of the internet. But you're people who are ready, who are searching, who are reaching, who want to be more, want your life to be more focused and more productive. And you search around the internet, you know, and you find something, you say, oh, that's interesting, and then it maybe turns out not so interesting, and you keep searching, and then you find something, well, I'm going to investigate this, so you end up here, or you end up reading, or you end up looking at videos. And that's the magic of the internet. It's a great leveler. If it didn't have the internet, I would have been forced to go through a publisher. And a publisher has one aim in life, and that is to make money on the books that they publish. And they looked at my books and they said, well, it looks like it has some promise here, but you know, is this a touchy-feely book or is this a science book? So don't confuse those two, because it's two different markets. The touchy-feely people don't like science. The science people don't like touchy-feely. Don't combine those two, because, you know, write 2 different books, 3 different books if you want, but don't get that stuff all mixed up, because then your market's all mixed up and it won't work. We won't make any money on it. You see, but my book had to integrate all that. It had to integrate the touchy-feely with the science, and it all had to be integrated into one thing. Of course, they didn't understand that, because they would have actually had to read it to get that. And of course, they get hundreds of books coming across their desk in a week, and they can't read any of them. You kind of flip, get a kind of a feel of it, a little sample here and there, maybe spend 10 minutes with a 300-page book, and they've made up their mind what the problem is and what gets published and what doesn't. So that would have been my only outlet. I wouldn't have been able to publish these books. I would have had to make the touchy-feely version and then the other version, and then they'd still have the problem, because the whole point of the book is to integrate all that together into one person, say one individual that gets the whole big picture of all of it. And that would have been impossible. Just nobody was going to take that. And they look at the book and they say, this is too long. Says, people aren't going to pick up a book that's this big. It's intimidating. If you want a book, 200, 250 pages, 300 tops, keep the subject simple, don't say anything complicated, make it have a happy ending, and you're good to go. We'll make money. Well, my books didn't do any of that. So the internet is why I'm here. And for most of you, the internet is why you're here. So what's the power? That's the power of the internet. And not only for authors like me, but for people who sell music and make music. It used to be that nobody would hear your music other than your neighbors and your friends, unless you could find a publisher. And the big publishers were only interested in what they thought was popular now. So all of that other music that didn't happen to fit into popular now and different from everybody else, something that was unique, because we don't want to just keep putting the same thing in, because so-and-so's got that market tied up, and that's our company, we're selling a lot of that, we don't need competitors in that. So if you didn't fit their needs, you didn't get published. Your music was yours and your neighbors and your friends, period. Now that's not true. Now you put it out on a website. People like it, they go. People like it, they buy it. You see, we've just eliminated the need for that middleman to tell us what it is we should read and what sort of music we should listen to. That's freedom. That's great. There's a price to pay. What we pay for is the criminals also found the internet, and they can use it just like we can. But that's the way it is. Things are like that. You create a tool, and you make a shovel, and somebody can dig a foundation for their house, and somebody else can hit their neighbor over the head with it, steal their money. So it's just tools are tools. You can use them. But the internet is a very enabling thing that has started a process now where people like us can come together and be helpful to each other, grow, become love, and that will help all the other things. It's not just my big toe. I mean, there's 100 different people who are out saying, love one another. It's better business than trying to rip everybody off. It's not just me saying that. There's hundreds of people saying that. All different kinds of formats, all different ways, Some of it's stranger, some of it less strange, some of it, self-help, some of it business. There's a book out about business. What is it, Pamela? The Conscious Business or something like that? Yeah, Conscious Business. It's all about how to do business and be conscious of what you're doing and do it right, you see. So there's books and things everywhere. And as long as they're all separate little isolated bubbles, none of them will ever make a big difference. But we all get together, and people who like my book, you see, they'll go now read Conscious Business or, any of the other 100 books out there, and we're all kind of on the same sheet of music coming from different directions, and it all adds together. That's how you start a movement. That's how you start getting more people involved, and the more people involved, the better the vibe, the better the intent is, that it gets positive, more people get interested in it. We have this mind thing that we're connected to everybody. That's how you get things like Beanie Babies, right? You have women standing in lines at 4 o'clock in the morning because they want this little rag doll stuff full of styrofoam pellets, and why? Well, it's because we pass this around psychically. That's what makes fads. Somebody says, "Oh, this is wonderful, it's so wonderful," and other people say, "Really? Is that wonderful? Oh, I should have one too." And it just passes around, and you get past some critical point where it snowballs, and then it becomes a fad. And it doesn't matter whether it's hula hoops or Beanie Babies or whatever it is. That's what makes fads. It's the way we pass information between us, and people are excited and they're positive about it. Well, that makes other people get excited and positive about it. People are miserable and mean and grouchy about it, other people get mean and grouchy about it. So here we are, if we get 50 of us in a room and we're all about love and peace and growing up and bettering ourselves and helping other people grow up, well, that's a big deal. It couldn't happen before. And you guys will all influence all the people around you. As you grow up, you'll make a huge difference in the world, just by understanding and being. And that's the idea. And if we all do this and integrate with each other, and everybody's reinforcing everybody else's way to get there, then that's terrific. So it's not a competitive thing. It's not like, well, here's my big toe, you ought to do that. That's the real truth. These other guys, they're just pretenders. That's not it at all. Everybody's working toward this idea. However they're working toward it, they're part of the solution. And anybody who's picking up on any of that, they're part of the solution. So that's what we're here about. And the internet is actually making that possible, so that these little bubbles of enlightenment don't just pop and do a little local thing and then dissipate and go away. So it's wonderful. The downside is tough, but it's worth it. You accept the downside for the upside. I wouldn't get rid of the internet just because there's criminals on it that are trying to take advantage and rip people off. It's just the way it is. We have to deal with that. And that will go away once more people aren't so inclined to be criminals. So we are part of our own solution. People will get together. That's one of the wonderful things about these events. I like these events because of the people I meet. That's what's really nice. You get all these people together in one room, who have very positive intents and want to grow are caring and want to try to get rid of the ego. Yeah, they know they have ego. Yeah, they know they have anger. Yeah, they know they have all these things, but they really want to change that and they want to grow up. And you get all these people in the room and the energy's just really good here. It's just really nice. And we share this, and it's kind of an upper for everyone, and we pull each other up. It's a very pleasant kind of thing, and everybody's so nice because, look, this is the cream of the crop. These are the people who care. These are the people who want to become love. Who else would you rather spend the Saturday afternoon with than a bunch of people who want to become love, you know? It's great. So, and that's the thing that the people watching at home on YouTube miss. That's the difference between being here and catching on YouTube. You catch it on YouTube and it's just kind of it's a more sterile experience. When you're here, it's a more alive experience. And that's not just me, it's all of you that are spreading that. So that's, yes, and that's how you get to be empathetic with somebody, that you can live their reality. You can see it from their viewpoint. It's because you care about them, and you just connect. It's not a, you know, it sounds like a really difficult thing. What's the prescription for doing that? How do I go about that? You know, how many, you know, what's the, but it's something you just come to as you grow up. That becomes available, just like out of body and stuff becomes available if you want to do it. Nobody has to do any of these things. They're not that important, but if you want to, it's there.
In My Big Toe, you describe 3 paths to consciousness evolution. Could you talk about the 3 of those?
Sure. In MBT, I talk about 3 paths toward to improving your consciousness. Okay, and that's the warrior's path, was kind of the intellectual path. Okay, there's the path of service, which is where you do good deeds, and then there's the path, we might say, of devotion or surrender, where you just say, all right, you know, I'm one with everything. I surrender. I'm no longer trying to be me against the world. I'm with the world. You kind of surrender to it all. You just let it go. Let all the ego and fear disappear. Okay, those are 3 paths. Now, there's really millions of paths. Every path that you're on, whatever your path is, will take you to where you want to go, will take you to that enlightenment, will take you to that end if you simply stay aware of the feedback. How's it working? Are you losing ego? Are you becoming love? Are you empathetic? Do you care? And if you say, well, I could do better, then make an effort to do better. And as long as you do that, doesn't matter what path you're on, you will get to the end point. You will get to where you want to go, whatever path you're on. But now you take all these paths and you notice that there's 3 kind of characteristic ways that you can sort them into 3 bins. And the first is the kind of the intellectual way. It's called the warrior's path, and that's where you use your intellect to realize, oh, I have a problem here. I have ego and I have fear, and that's not good. And you know, this other way sounds better, and it's an intellectual thing. You think about all this stuff, and it makes sense to you. And many of you are on that path because that's why you're here. You read it, intellectual, it makes sense to you, so you come here to find out more about it. Okay, but that's just one path, and it's the reason it's called the warrior's path is because it's a struggle. You're constantly struggling. You're fighting and struggling to get rid of that ego, to find that fear, and oh, there you are, and there's the fear again, and there's your ego, and oh, darn, and so it's a fight. It's a struggle. Warrior's path. Now, the second one is the you know, where you do good deeds. It's where you just try to help people. Now, at first, you're probably doing good deeds because you think you ought to do them. I should do good deeds. Well, you don't get a lot out of that, but what it does is get you to meet people, get you connected with people. And pretty soon, you kind of like the good deed feeling because it works. You're being helpful. And then more and more, you progress into the doing it because you want to, not because you think you should. And now you're growing up, you see. So that's the little old lady that lives on the corner house in the street that always bakes cookies and hands them out to all the children as they go by on our way home from school, right? She doesn't have to do that. She just does it because she cares. And we have people like that all over. They're service oriented. They do things for people. They take care of people. They like people. And they're expressing their love and caring by doing things for people. You know, and that's a way you can learn. So that's just another modality. It's not the intellectual route. You're not thinking about anything. There's no, there's no plan, there's no process, there's nothing. You just like people, and you like doing things for them. Makes you feel good. And then there's the path of surrender, and this is more typically the religious path, where in a path of surrender, you just give yourself up to something bigger. Say, okay, larger consciousness system, I'm yours, I'll do what I need to do, tell me what to do next, instructions. And this is an intuitive path. It's the opposite of an intellectual path. This is entirely an intuitive path, and you follow your heart. Follow your heart, and if your heart says do evil things, then you learn because you get hit and people don't like you, and then you change because you want to be of service, and you just give yourself up. So what that means is you directly just surrender your ego. It's not about me anymore. See, Master, tell me what I should do. It's the religious path, the path of surrender. So, and any of those paths will take you to where you need to go. And most people are a combination of those paths. They're a little bit of this, a little bit of that, some of the other thing, a little intellect there, a little service, a little give themselves up, and that works fine. So that's why I say the path you're on is good enough. You don't need to change paths. You don't need to say, well, what really should I do? You should say, what feels right to me? How shall I approach this problem? If you're a left brain intellectual type, then the warrior's path is yours, and you're going to struggle your way through it. If you're a surrender and that just suits you better, then you just give it all up. So that's how the three paths are. But any path that anybody's on is the right path for them. You should never pick your path based on your intellect. Just pick your path based on what feels natural to you, and don't analyze it, just be it. And if it works, keep it up, and if it doesn't work, change it so it works better.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
In My Big Toe, you also talk about a subjective scientific method that could be kind of fleshed out.
Sure. The subjective, there is such thing as subjective science. That's why we have, like I said earlier, those are all the soft sciences. All the soft sciences are soft because there's subjective components to them. They're not entirely objective. And the subjective science is generally statistics-based. So, psychology, sociology, medicine, they're all statistics-based. It's what you do to groups of people and how groups of individuals react, and the statistics of how they react. Well, learning to love, growing up, you have to look at this as a kind of a statistical thing. I'll try this. All right, I'm doing this. What's the feedback I get back? Some people like it, some people don't. Why? How do I feel about it? And then you do it again, or maybe you do it differently. Maybe you're talking to a non-physical being. If you have a connection with a non-physical being and you get some kind of connection back, then you don't say, gee, that's nice, that was my Uncle Fred, he died 20 years ago and it's great getting in touch with him. Most people won't say that. Most people say, did I make that up? You see? And you don't know whether you made it up. And there's no way to tell whether you made it up right then. You have to do it again and again and again, and after the 100th time you've talked to this Uncle Fred, supposedly, you'll know whether that's really Uncle Fred or not. But see, that's statistics. You got to do it enough that you build up enough data that you feel like you know what you're doing, and that is statistics. So things that are subjective are things that you can't judge quickly. Like I said with the aspirin, you can't judge quickly because you give an aspirin to a guy with a headache and he doesn't help him. Doesn't mean aspirin is not effective with headaches. You just have to keep working it, and you may find that it isn't effective. But the only way to find out is to do it. Get out there and experience it and do it. Give it to 1,000 people with headaches and see what happens. Now you know something. So all the subjective science is basically statistics-based. It's experience-based. And the reason that it's soft is because it's not objective. It has more uncertainty. You give a guy an aspirin and it's uncertain what that aspirin is going to do in his biochemistry. It may help him, may not. It may help him today. It may not work for him tomorrow because he has a different kind of physiological headache going on there. So you don't know because there's so much uncertainty. In the hard sciences, there's very little uncertainty. You drop the ball, it falls down. How fast does it fall down? You can measure it to 15 decimal places. Very little uncertainty. You know, this disc is made out of certain material, a certain kind of chemical, and molecular properties, and you can list those down again, 10 decimal places. Very little uncertainty. You deal with people, and now there's lots of uncertainty. See, sociology, psychology, economics, all these are people-based. And when you're people-based, you don't know what you're going to get from time to time. Even in your statistics, you take a bunch of people, take 1,000 people, give them each an aspirin and see what it does, and you'll get 75% it helps. The next week, you take a different bunch of people and do that same thing to them, and it's 80 or 50, and it changes because the people are different. And even if you had the same population and did it 2 different times, you get different answers. Every time you do the experiment, it's a different answer. But if you do the experiment enough, all those different answers kind of give you a pattern, and you can start to come to conclusions. So that's the difference between soft science and hard science. Soft science is statistics-based, but it's still science. You still have hypotheses, you still take research, you take the data. It's just harder in the sense that you got to do it over and over and over again to see what the effect is collectively, because it's a collective thing rather than personally. And with you going out of body, did I just go out of body, or was that a dream? Did I just talk with some entity, or was that a dream? You know, what's going on here? Well, if you have to answer that question because your intellectual side wants to know, well, I don't want to be wasting my time doing something if I'm just making it up. I'm not going to talk to Uncle Fred if it's just my imagination doing that. So, forget it, Uncle Fred. I don't know that you're real, so I can't talk to you. See, that's self-defeating. You need to say, okay, this is an experience I'm having. What's the meaning of this experience? Will it be valuable? 100 talks later, you can answer that question. Was it valuable? Well, if it was valuable, does it matter whether it's Uncle Fred or you? If it's not valuable, does it matter whether it's Uncle Fred or you? You see, you find that it really doesn't matter. The point is it valuable? That's the key. If it's valuable to you, it doesn't matter whether it's Uncle Fred or not. And then pretty soon you just even lose interest in deciding whether it's Uncle Fred. You just say, it's an experience. I've had an experience with Uncle Fred, or something that's related to Uncle Fred somehow. And here's what I'm learning. Here's what I gained from it. And if the answer is nothing, I didn't learn anything or gain anything from it, then you're wasting time with Uncle Fred, whether it's Uncle Fred or not. You see? So these ideas is, was it really Uncle Fred? That is a burning need of your ego to find out whether you're a fool or not. If you don't worry about that, then you can just accept the information and take from it what's useful and not. And it'll take iterations to find out what's useful. Because if you meet a friend and you talk with him once, you don't decide whether that friend is useful or not. It's only after you know that friend, really get to know him, and it's a personal relationship, do you really get value out of it. That first 10 minutes you had meeting with him, that didn't tell you a whole lot. That told you maybe there was promise. And you go on that promise and develop it deeper. It's the same way with Uncle Fred. If you have some or anything else that you're doing in your life, or out of body, or the rest of it, you have something, you say, well, that's a little promise there. I felt that. I laid down and I got this state. And that was kind of interesting. That's promise. I wonder where this will go. Let's see. Next time I get it, I'm just going to go with it and see where it takes me. You see, or that was scary. Felt like electric shock in my body. I don't know about that, you see, and now you have fear. It takes you a different direction. So you just be open. Use what works, discard what doesn't, and don't come to any beliefs about what's going to work or not in the future. Just be open, and that's the way you live your life. That's the whole, that's the big concept. Be positive, care, have the courage to go forward. And if Uncle Fred's on your path forward, then have the conversation. If it doesn't work, let it go. Don't get wrapped up in it. Don't let it run your life. Don't let it affect your decision making. That's another thing. Sometimes the larger conscious system will give you stuff that is not right. You can be fed misinformation as well as information. Now, why would a nice larger conscious system want to give you misinformation? Well, because this whole thing is about you learning. And let's say you get good at healing, or you get good at remote viewing, and you get this information, and you start to get pretty proud of yourself for this information you're able to get. So you start making money. Hey, you know, pay me money and I'll remote view your future, or I'll do this or that, or other kinds of things. And you're getting pretty good at this. You know, most people can't do it, and I can. I'm special. Well, what'll happen then? You'll get up and you'll brag a whole lot about it, and it'll be a big deal, and you'll fail miserably. The larger conscious system will give you, little green men with pointy ears, hiding, under the desk or something, and you'll look under the desk and they won't be there. They'll tell you something that's wrong just to bring you down a little bit, and because your ego is getting carried away and making you non-productive in this game of lower entropy, right? You're not doing your thing right. So, you get a little slap for that, because that maybe will straighten you out and make you pay attention. So you sometimes get information from the system. So when somebody calls you up and says, "Hey, I'm your Uncle Fred," you go, "Oh, okay. Hi, Unc. What's happening? What's happening, man?" You talk to Uncle Fred and see what he's got, and if it doesn't work out, it didn't work out. Didn't learn anything from that. If it does work out, go with it. But it really doesn't matter whether it's your Uncle Fred or not. It's an experience. Don't throw away your experiences just because they're strange. You have a lot of experiences. Sometimes they'll be pretty strange. See where they go. See where those vibrations take you. Don't be afraid of them. See, and that's where it takes courage. Because people will say, "Oh, my Uncle Fred came and talked to me last night, and that was weird. I'm not going to do that anymore." They're afraid of it. They're afraid that actually if they talk with their Uncle Fred, they'll be crazy. And they wouldn't tell anybody about that. I talk with my dead uncle. Really? And, move away from you. That's a problem. And then you can get wadded up over that, to where now you're afraid to go to sleep at night because you might talk to Uncle Fred, and Uncle Fred is somebody you shouldn't be talking to, therefore you must be going nuts. And you can get into some kind of downward spiral where you get all wadded up into those kinds of things, and now you're a lot worse off before you started. So things can get wrong with that. But if you don't care really much, all you care about is this helpful? You won't know unless you follow it. Is this rabbit hole going to be interesting, a learning experience? Well, run on down it and see. Don't be afraid. That's kind of the way you have to run your life. And if it works out good, good for you. If it doesn't, let it go. Go on someplace else. So this burning desire to know, I need to know, is this real or is it not? It's really a desire of the ego. The ego doesn't want to be made a fool of. The ego wants to know for sure that this is really Uncle Fred. And if it's not, then I don't want to go down this path, because that would be crazy, and just talking to myself, pretending I'm Uncle Fred. Is that nuts or what? It takes courage to say, I don't care. Let's go see what happens. You see, you have to be a pioneer. You have to be an experimentalist. You have to just do it and find out, what does it do for you? And not worry about, is it real? You'll find that out enough later. Mostly anything that's subjective, you won't know. Is that real? Does that aspirin work? You won't know unless you give it 1,000 people. Unless you do it 1,000 times, you really won't know whether this rabbit hole is taking you to Wonderland or to something really valuable. And when you're open to things, the system will start to feed you information and stuff, because now you've opened up pathways where it can communicate to you. So if you're open to Uncle Fred, then anybody might pop in and start up a conversation. And Uncle Fred was just a leader to see whether you'd run the other way or not. So you let that go, and now you've opened up a pathway of communications, you see, to the larger conscious system. Wow, neat idea. But it started with Uncle Fred, and if you shut that off because you were afraid of it, opportunity lost. Or if you take it and drive yourself nuts with it because you get all wadded up over it, opportunity lost. So I probably overkilled your question, didn't I?
I think I have a short question. Did the big cheese lower his entropy through incarnating? And can any low entropy being lower their entropy by other means besides reality trainers? Does it just take a lot longer and they can do it, or you almost have to go through the reality trainer to lower?
No, the big cheese did do incarnation time here. And the reality trainer, like this physical reality that we're in, It's just a speedier process for most of us. And the reason is because there's tighter feedback. You get immediate reactions. How you are creates stuff that, you get hit between the eyes with a 2x4 with the results of your own actions and the way you think. And that's just a better learning opportunity than when it's not so strong. But yes, of course you can learn in other reality systems. This reality system wasn't always here. The virtual realities like we have them didn't start at the beginning. That's something that evolved with this system as a need. Like most evolution, you have needs and things evolve to meet them. So they had to do all that growing to get to the place where they could make virtual realities without them. So sure, you can evolve without ever touching a virtual reality, but generally it's a slower process. This kind of a virtual reality is the fast track. It's the trainer. You can probably learn a lot of things by reading a book, but it's a lot quicker if you go out and get involved in it. Right? You can read a book about how to weave baskets. You read lots of books about them, but if you go out and start weaving the baskets, get an interactive, hands-on experience, you'll learn about weaving baskets a whole lot faster than you will by reading about them. So one of them is just more of a data exchange. You're not in this kind of a rule set. You're just exchanging information. It's like reading the book about weaving baskets. Sure, you can learn things that way, but this is quicker. And that's why we keep coming back here, because this is a better alternative. People say, I'll never come back here again. This place is so awful. I'll never come back here. But this is the place to come. Other physical realities too. This is a place to come because it gives you more opportunities to succeed, more opportunities to fail. It heightens the whole process.
We're talking a lot about ego, and I always feel like the word ego kind of gets a bad rap. I feel like it's a tool that we're kind of stuck with, that that we can use, or that we're stuck with to use, whether it's gets overgrown or whatever. I wanted to know what you thought about that, because you've said get rid of your ego. Can you really get rid of your ego?
Yes, you can. That's what you're supposed to be doing. When you get rid of your fear, your ego's gone. You don't have to get rid of your ego if you can get rid of your fear, because they're all tied together. If you get rid of your fear, you get rid of your egos, expectations, and beliefs all disappear along with the fear. So ego, the way I define it, is awareness in the service of fear. You have awareness, and the awareness is trying to avoid the fear, trying to deal with the fear and avoid the fear, and that's the ego. Okay, so we don't have an ego if we don't have the fear. Now, that's my definition of ego, and as it turns out, it kind of matches Freud's definition of ego as well too, although he didn't put it in terms of fear. And when he looked at it, since everybody had one, well, it was not only normal but desirable, because all the good people, all his friends had one, he had one, and everybody had it, so certainly it was necessary and whatever. He didn't see it as a pathological, development inside of consciousness. But basically, it's just fear. And the reason that we are self-focused is because we're trying to take care of number one. We're trying to make sure that nothing bad happens, things happen the way we want, things don't happen to the people we like. Here's my wife and children, whatever, and I got to protect them. I'm afraid for that. So all the ego is you're dealing with fear. It's about me, what I want. And yes, we all have it. We deal with it. We live with it all the time, but that doesn't make it a good thing. It just makes it extremely common and very normal, and it leads us into trouble, because as we are self-focused on ourselves and protecting ourselves and our stuff and our loved ones and that kind of stuff, it separates us from everybody else. When you're full of fear and it's about me, then it can't be about them. Fear is about self. Love is about other. See, that's just the way it points. Ego is about self. Ego, I, me, I'm the ego and it's all about me. I need to take care of me. I have to brush my teeth at night, otherwise I'll get cavities, you see. That's fear of cavities. Right? Well, you should brush your teeth just because it's a healthy thing to do. That's not fear. That's just being smart. Well, which is it? You see, if you brush your teeth because it's a healthy thing to do and you're being conscientious or whatever, being responsible, then that's not ego. That's just awareness doing its job. If you brush your teeth because you're terrified of cavities, and you don't ever want to go to a dentist because they're the scariest people in the world, so brush, 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 keep me away from that dentist, and it's fear, that's the wrong reason to brush your teeth. So a lot of things we do, are ego and fear-based. And this fear thing comes out because people say, well, isn't fear good? What about irrational fear, like being afraid of lions, tigers, and bears? Oh, no, right? Isn't that a good thing? We should be afraid of those because it keeps us out of the woods at night. And that's healthy for us. No, you stay out of the woods at night because you're not stupid. You don't go into the woods at night with a lot of lions, tigers, and bears, unless you're prepared for them. So it's not fear. Fear's the problem. If you fear the lions and tigers and bears, then it'll cause you other problems. Maybe you won't go near the woods. Maybe not even in the daytime. Maybe you won't even go out of your house because you live near the woods. Or you have problems if you do have to go through the woods and you see one of those awful creatures, you may freeze, not be able to move, not be able to react because you're afraid. Well, all that does is make you lunch. You see, that doesn't help you out. If you're not afraid and have no fear of the lions, tigers, and bears, then you have to go in the woods, you prepare yourself. You find out about them. They'll tell you in the book or on the internet to take some pepper spray or something else with you. Make loud noises. Don't stare them in the face. They'll give you all these tips and things about wild animals, what to do and what not to do. Now if you run across one, instead of freezing and becoming lunch, you do the right thing to make the probability of your survival the highest that it can be. So the fear is always the negative. There are no rational fears. All fears are irrational. All fears lead to problems. There's no such thing as a rational good fear. You can get to wherever that rational good fear might take you, you can get there better with less risk if you're fearless but smart. So people confuse being fearless with being reckless and being stupid. Oh, I'm fearless. I'll jump off a building without a parachute. Well, that's not being fearless. That's being stupid, you see. So there's a difference between being fearless and being stupid, and fear is never helpful, and it's the same with ego. There's really nothing that an ego ever does for you that's any good that you can't do better without it, because the ego is derived by the fear. But yes, we all have it, and yes, we deal with it, and yes, that's how we get through life. But it's unfortunate because we could get through life better if we didn't have it, if we cared more about people, about cooperating, not so much about us. Sometimes you have to care about yourself, but you care about yourself not out of fear, which means not out of ego. You care about yourself because it's the smart thing to do, right? You brush your teeth, you stay out of the woods at night. You do that because that's an intelligent thing to do, not because you're afraid. That's the difference.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you.